A little flower seller on the streets of Manhattan, with a worn-out basket and quiet eyes, made a Harvard professor question everything he believed in, because she guessed the number of beans in a hidden bag again and again, New York City, 5 p.m. Manhattan glowed in the fading sunlight as cars pulsed forward like the city's heartbeat. Amid the noise, a small basket with marigolds, roses, and lilies sat quietly on the sidewalk. Next to it was a 10-year-old girl named Amelia. Amelia had been selling flowers for 3 years, ever since her parents died in an accident in Queens. She lived with her grandmother in a tiny attic room of an old building. Life was reduced to a few coins she earned each evening. Each day, after attending classes for homeless children, Amelia returned to her usual street corner between the laundromat and the bus stop. Passers-by recognized her small frame and soft call, "Fresh flowers, $1." Amelia stood out, not just for her wide eyes and calm voice, but for how she observed the world. She remembered which flower colors people liked, which scents made them smile. If a man bought lilies every Friday, she wrote in her notebook, "Gray hair, lilies, Friday." In the middle of the city's chaos, she built a system of quiet memory and patterns. This system earned her a nickname among local kids, the Bean Counter Girl. The story began on an autumn afternoon when a boy challenged her, "Guess how many beans are in this bag?" The cloth bag was sewn shut. Amelia held it, shook it, pressed it to her ear, and said, "9." He poured the beans out. 9 exactly. They tried again and again. In 10 rounds, she was wrong only once, by 1 bean. Adults thought it was luck. The kids did not. They began betting. The game got harder, changing bags, adding noise, having different people drop beans. Still, Amelia guessed right. "How do you know?" one man asked. "I remember how people act," she said. "I guess from what they usually do." One rainy evening, her umbrella torn and collar damp, Amelia was still out selling flowers. A tall young man with a backpack named Oliver stopped to buy a marigold. Oliver was a senior statistics student at Harvard, working with a research group in New York. He had come to study small businesses in poor areas. But when he saw Amelia guess correctly 3 times in a row, he paused his work and began watching. "How did you know there were 9 beans?" he asked. "I didn't know," she said. "The last guy always dropped small handfuls. This one's hand shook a little. The sound wasn't too light, so I guessed 9 or 10. Oliver froze. That was Bayesian thinking, using past experience and real-time clues to make a better guess. He quickly explained, "What you're doing is called updating your belief. You remember past games, then you adjust based on what you just saw or heard. In statistics, we call that Bayes' rule." "Did you study statistics?" he asked. Amelia smiled and shook her head. "I just sell flowers." That night, Oliver wrote a blog post called Bayes on the Sidewalk. He told the story of a flower girl who used Bayesian logic without knowing the name. The post quietly spread among statisticians. A week later, Professor Caldwell, one of the biggest critics of Bayesian theory, sent Oliver a letter asking to meet Amelia. But before any meeting, Amelia was still a little girl with wet sleeves, worn shoes, and a tilted flower basket. She still whispered her offer in the winter breeze, and at that street corner, between cars, smoke, and footsteps, a new kind of learning had begun to bloom. Not from a classroom, but from the heart of a quiet girl who noticed everything. The next afternoon, Oliver returned. He stood across the street, notebook in hand, watching Amelia. She was playing the bean game again, this time with 2 other boys and a girl. The rules hadn't changed. A cloth bag, shaken and handed over. Amelia would listen, think, and guess. Oliver recorded each result. Over 10 rounds, Oliver watched as Amelia made one accurate guess after another. Only once did she miss the mark, and even then, by just a single bean. 9 correct out of 10. Too precise to be luck, too consistent to ignore. By the 10th round, she had guessed 9 out of 10 with near-perfect accuracy. Oliver circled the results. This wasn't chance. It was pattern recognition, memory, judgment. And the way she explained it wasn't just remarkable, it was mathematically elegant. "What made you guess 9 on that last one?" he asked after the game. Amelia, sitting cross-legged on the pavement, looked up. "That boy? He always throws quick, like he wants to finish fast. Quick means light. But he was nervous today, so maybe just a little more than usual." 9 felt right. Oliver scribbled in his notebook. "She's using dynamic priors," he murmured to himself. "Her brain is adjusting on the fly. It's Bayesian updating without formulas." From behind the crowd, a man with slicked hair and a rolled-up betting slip shouted, "This is just mind games. She tricks them with psychology." Amelia's face stayed calm. "I just listen," she said softly. "And remember." Oliver turned to the man. "Sir, if she's tricking everyone, why does the math still work?" The man waved him off and disappeared down the block. Oliver felt a familiar spark, one that every statistician dreams of. He wasn't just witnessing a story, he was witnessing data made human. He sat beside Amelia on the sidewalk. "Do you write all this down somewhere?" he asked. Amelia nodded. "In my notebook, I have pages. Each person has patterns. Some hold the bag tight, some let it swing, some walk fast after. It all tells something." She opened her small, well-worn journal. Inside were sketches of hands, scribbled notes. Round steps, fast hands, equals 6 to 8 beans. Slow drop, bag bounces, equals 11 plus. Oliver stared at the notes. They weren't random observations. They were behavioral priors, human-based variables. Amelia had unknowingly built a real-world statistical model through experience. "Have you ever heard of a thing called probability?" he asked gently. Amelia shrugged. "I guess I know it without knowing the word." He smiled. "That's the best kind." As the light dimmed and the crowd thinned, Oliver invited Amelia and her grandmother to a small cafe nearby. Over cocoa and toast, he explained more about his work. "I'm working on a project at Harvard about how people use probability in daily life, especially those without formal training. And you, Amelia, you're kind of astonishing." Her grandmother, Mrs. June, looked uneasy. "Is this safe?" she asked. "We've had people make promises before. None kept." Oliver nodded slowly. "I don't want anything from her. I want the world to see what she's already doing. That's all." After a long pause, Mrs. June whispered, "She's always noticed more than others, even as a baby. She'd cry only when someone with anger came near. When she lost her parents, she sat for hours watching pigeons, counting their wing beats." Amelia looked away. Oliver changed the topic gently. "How do you feel about visiting a university?" She raised an eyebrow. "Like Harvard?" "Yes, just for a weekend. You wouldn't have to stay. But Professor Caldwell, he's very famous, wants to meet you. He wants to know how your mind works." Mrs. June leaned back. "You mean the man who writes all those books about numbers?" Oliver laughed. "Yes, that's him." "And he wants to meet a flower girl?" she asked. "He thinks she might be the most natural statistician he's never met." That night, back in their attic room, Amelia stared out the window. Below, the city buzzed with taxis and neon. She thought of the beanbags, the guesses, the way her heart beat faster when people doubted her, and slower when she proved them wrong. Her grandmother sat quietly on the edge of the bed, knitting. "You don't have to go," she said. "You're enough just the way you are." "I know," Amelia whispered, "but I think I want to see what else is out there." Downstairs, Oliver waited on the steps, holding an empty bag and a single marigold she had given him earlier. He didn't know exactly where this was heading, but he knew something rare had begun, and that soon the steps of Harvard might echo with something more than theory, something warm, living, and unexpected. Amelia, the girl who heard math in the way a bean hit fabric, and answered with more than numbers. She answered with understanding, and tomorrow she'd take her first train north. Into the heart of academia, with a notebook, a basket, and a gift no textbook had ever taught. Saturday morning on 14th Street was noisier than usual. Amelia, in her thick sweater and patched shoes, had returned to her usual spot. But today the bean game drew a bigger crowd, thanks to whispers about the flower girl who always guessed right. Among the audience was a new face, a man in a brown coat, sharp eyes, and a gold ring. No one knew his name, but the regulars called him the dealer. He was known for testing street performers with tricky games. He stepped forward holding a dark green canvas bag. "Mind if I try?" he asked Amelia, voice smooth. Amelia nodded politely. "Go ahead." He turned his back, made a show of dropping beans into the bag, tied it shut, then walked toward her. But just before handing it over, he made a slight switch behind his back, pulling a nearly identical bag from his coat pocket. Only Oliver, watching from across the street, noticed the switch. His heart skipped. Amelia took the bag, shook it gently, closed her eyes, and pressed it to her ear. 11, she said calmly. The man smirked. "You sure?" Amelia nodded. "I hear more bounce than usual, but not too many." He opened the bag. Exactly 11. The crowd erupted. Laughter, claps. One woman shouted, "She's magic!" But Oliver didn't cheer. He rushed over. "You switched the bag," he said to the man. The man grinned. "So what? She still guessed right." "That's not the point," Oliver said. "You tried to rig it." The man turned and disappeared into the market. Oliver looked at Amelia. "You had no idea?" She shook her head. "No, but I knew something was different. The fabric smelled of tobacco, and the shake was heavier on one side." Oliver felt a chill. She hadn't just guessed. She had sensed change, adjusted her thinking in real time. "That's Bayesian inference," he whispered. "You updated based on a new hidden condition." Amelia tilted her head. "I just knew it wasn't the same as yesterday." Before they could continue, a loud voice rang out from a nearby storefront. It was Mrs. Halberd, the grumpy owner of the dry cleaning shop. "This is getting out of hand," she barked. "Crowds every morning, noise, games. This is a business district, not a circus." The crowd quieted. Amelia stepped back. Mrs. Halberd pointed a finger. "You, little girl, you're disrupting the street. I want this stopped." Amelia's face flushed. Her hands trembled. Oliver stepped forward. "Ma'am, she's just a child. A quiet one at that. The people are gathered because they believe in what she does." Mrs. Halberd crossed her arms. "I'm calling the community board. This ends today." She stormed back inside. Amelia sat down, silent. Oliver knelt beside her. "You didn't do anything wrong." She nodded slowly. "I know. But maybe I've drawn too much attention." He looked at her notebook again. Pages filled with notes, not for fame, but for understanding. "You turned a bag of beans into a lesson in probability." And someone tried to make it a scam, but you still saw the truth. Amelia didn't reply. She just looked out at the thinning crowd. That evening, as the market closed and shadows stretched across the sidewalk, Amelia packed her basket slowly. She glanced at the space where she used to sit. Maybe it's time I learned somewhere new. Oliver smiled gently. Then let's get on that train. And with that, the girl who had never left her corner of 14th Street took her first step toward Cambridge. With a quiet heart, a sharper mind, and the world of probability waiting to meet her. The morning after the 14th Street scene, Oliver knocked on the attic door of the small building Amelia called home. Mrs. June opened it slowly. Her eyes were tired. "She's still asleep," she said. "Rough day yesterday." "I understand," Oliver replied, "but I came to ask something important." A few minutes later, Amelia sat at the kitchen table, stirring tea. Her notebook lay beside her, open to a page filled with questions about chance, rhythm, memory. Oliver sat across from her. "Harvard wants to meet you. Not for show. They want to understand how your mind works. I think you could teach us more than you realize." Mrs. June tightened her shawl. "You want to take her up north?" "Just for the weekend," Oliver said. "She'd meet a few professors, visit the campus, maybe talk through her process." Amelia looked at her grandmother. Her face was calm, but her eyes shimmered. "No," Mrs. June said firmly. "She's a child. She's already had too many changes. Too many people coming and going." Oliver stayed silent. He understood. Amelia rose, walked to the window, looked out at the city below. Then, turning around, she spoke softly but clearly. "If I can learn one more thing, see one more pattern, maybe one day I can help more people. Maybe someone like you, Grandma. Maybe someone like Mama and Papa, if they were still here." She paused. "If I have one more number, I might be able to save one more life." The room fell silent. Mrs. June sat down slowly, hands clasped in her lap. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "There's something I've kept too long." She reached into a drawer, pulled out a small envelope, and handed it to Amelia. "Your mother wrote this before you were born. She never mailed it. Said she'd give it to you when the time was right." Amelia opened it gently. Inside, a letter in faded ink. Her mother's words spoke gently. "My sweet Amelia, if you ever feel small in a world too big, remember this. You were born with eyes that see deeper. Don't ever fear learning. Knowledge doesn't take you away from home. It brings you closer to who you are meant to be." Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes. She folded the letter with care, held it to her chest. Mrs. June, wiping her cheek, looked at Oliver. "Just the weekend?" He nodded. "Just the weekend." That night, Amelia packed her things into a second-hand backpack. Her grandmother tucked in a scarf, a small Bible, and a photo of her parents. Amelia added her notebook, 2 pencils, and the letter. Before sleeping, she sat by the window, gazing at the lights of Manhattan. Her mind wandered, not to Harvard's towers or professors, but to her mother's face, which she remembered only through stories and the curve of her grandmother's hands. In the quiet, Amelia whispered to herself, "I'll carry them both with me." At dawn, they stood on the platform of Penn Station. The morning fog curled around the tracks. Amelia held her grandmother's hand tightly. "You come back," Mrs. June said. "I will," Amelia whispered. "But I want to go see how far this little notebook can take me." The train ride to Cambridge was long and quiet. Amelia watched the city's change, brick buildings to fields, graffiti to ivy-covered walls. She thought about all the things she didn't know, but instead of fear, there was a soft curiosity, like the first time she tried to count birds by their wing beats. Oliver sat beside her, reviewing notes. Occasionally, he'd glance at her journal. She caught him once. "Do your professors ever listen to kids?" she asked. "Only when they say something no one else does," Oliver smiled. She nodded. "Then I'll say it plain." They arrived at Cambridge just past noon. The sun filtered through maple trees, lighting up the stone paths of the old campus. Students walked past in coats and scarves, books under arms. Amelia stepped onto Harvard ground with small steps, but steady ones. Her breath caught at the sight of the buildings. They looked like libraries turned into castles. "Ready?" Oliver asked. "I don't know what to say," she replied. "Just say what you see. That's always been your way." And so, the flower girl with the soft voice and steady hands crossed the threshold into Cambridge, where minds were tested, ideas challenged, and perhaps even old professors could be changed by a girl who listened deeper than most ever tried. She wasn't leaving home. She was carrying it forward, with every step, every number, every guess made not with luck, but with love. Professor Caldwell's office was as rigid as his reputation. Shelves of untouched books, a grandfather clock that ticked with surgical precision, and no sign of anything soft. Even the leather chairs seemed to resist comfort. When Amelia walked in, the professor didn't rise. He adjusted his glasses and gave her a look halfway between curiosity and skepticism. "So," he said, "you're the girl who guesses beans." Amelia nodded, her voice calm. "I try to notice things." Caldwell gestured to a group of students already seated. "You'll demonstrate in front of my class. No tricks, no crowd psychology. Just you and the numbers." Oliver stood quietly at the back of the room, notebook in hand. Amelia took her place. On a table in front of her were 5 sealed canvas bags, each containing a different number of metal beads. The students had randomized them, ensuring no one, including Oliver, knew which bag held what. Professor Caldwell spoke, loud and clear. "This is a simulation of stochastic input, pure randomness. Let's see if observational bias survives mathematical integrity." Amelia approached the first bag, picked it up, shook it gently. Her fingers brushed the fabric. Her eyes closed. 8, she said. The student opened the bag. 8 beads. The second. 12. Correct again. By the 4th bag, whispers began to rise among the students. Caldwell's brow furrowed. She was 4 for 4. 5th bag. Amelia paused longer. The fabric felt thicker. The sound was muted. 9, she said. The student opened it. 9 beads. Caldwell stood up. "Enough." He walked to the front of the room, gaze hard. "This is not science," he said sharply. "This is intuition. Theater. At best, crowd influence. At worst, a fluke." One student raised his hand. "But sir, the probabilities—" Caldwell cut him off. "Probability does not explain perfection. It predicts trends, not miracles." Amelia remained silent. Oliver finally spoke. "She's not claiming to be perfect, but her thinking follows the Bayesian process. She's making predictions based on priors, even if she doesn't call them that." Caldwell turned. "And you think this child rewrites what scholars have debated for centuries?" "No," Oliver replied. "I think she reminds us why we asked those questions in the first place." The room fell silent. Amelia, still standing, looked toward the window. "I don't know the big words," she said quietly. "But when things change, I notice, and I try to guess what comes next. That's all." Caldwell said nothing. He simply walked out. But 3 students stayed behind. They approached Amelia with questions, not about beans, but about how she listened, how she guessed, what she felt in her hands. And in that moment, the flower girl didn't need a title. She had started a conversation, one that even the professor of doubt could not silence forever. 2 days after the classroom test, Amelia sat with Oliver at a quiet corner of the Harvard library. Her notebook was open, but this time it wasn't just observations. It was formulas. Oliver pointed to a diagram. "This curve here shows the likelihood based on sound and weight. What you called bounces, we call that signal strength." Amelia listened carefully, pencil in hand. "So every new bag I shake, I'm starting from what I knew before, and then adjusting. That's like shifting the curve?" "Exactly," Oliver nodded. "You've been doing what we call subjective Bayesian updating, combining instinct with pattern memory. What you feel is the data." He called it calibrated intuition, a term he used to describe how Amelia's guesses weren't just based on prior knowledge, but also adjusted in real time by subconscious sensory cues. Together, they built a table. Columns, texture, bounce, tension, rhythm of the person's steps, time of day. Amelia filled them quickly from memory. As the model took shape, Professor Langford, a soft-spoken statistician and former student of Caldwell, passed by. He glanced at their work. "You're modeling behavioral variance from auditory cues?" he asked. Oliver nodded. "With real-world priors and adjusted weighting?" Langford leaned in. "This is unconventional, but promising. Who did the field work?" Oliver smiled. "She did." Langford looked at Amelia. "You're the bean girl?" Amelia nodded. He didn't scoff. He just asked, "May I show this to the department?" Oliver looked at Amelia. She hesitated, then nodded. Later that night, Langford quietly slipped the draft model and Amelia's observational notes into a sealed envelope. He hand-delivered it to the chair of the Applied Probability Division. The next morning, Caldwell received word that Amelia's model was being considered for inclusion in the annual departmental colloquium, a rare honor, especially for someone outside academia. Caldwell paced his office. He reread the notes. Calibrated intuition, field-inferred priors, emergent variable weighting. It was brilliant, but it had not come from him, and worse, it had come from a street child. He summoned Langford. "You went around me," Caldwell said flatly. Langford stood firm. "I followed the data. She is not a peer-reviewed source. She's an untapped one." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "I trained you to question everything, not abandon rigor for inspiration." Langford replied softly, "You also taught me to follow the truth, even if it comes from a cracked sidewalk." Meanwhile, Amelia and Oliver continued refining the model. She added one more row to their notes, the mood of the player, whether they joked, frowned, hesitated. "Even that changes the sound," she said. "Sad people drop beans slower." Oliver paused. "You're not just analyzing patterns. You're reading emotion into probability." "I think feelings have weight too," Amelia said. "Not in grams, but in how things fall." They presented the model in a small seminar room. Students came. So did Langford. And unexpectedly, so did Caldwell, standing silently at the back. Amelia explained her process with no jargon. She talked about the man with rough hands who always dropped 7 beans, The woman who hummed as she shook the bag and always used 10. Langford showed the math, the way Amelia's guesses formed a near-perfect Bayesian posterior when plotted. Caldwell didn't speak, but he stared at the graphs for a long time. After the seminar, as the room cleared, he approached the board. He pointed at the curve. "You've smoothed it with emotional variables," he said. "Yes," Amelia replied. He nodded slowly. "Then you're no longer studying randomness," he said. "You're measuring humanity." Then he turned and left. Outside, Oliver looked at Amelia. That wasn't approval, but it wasn't dismissal either. Amelia said, "It felt like a door opened. Just a little." That night, Langford received an email from Caldwell. It read, "I still disagree with the method, but I can't argue with the elegance. Proceed. But keep her name attached. She deserves that." And so, in the hallowed halls of theory, a girl from 14th Street wrote a footnote, no, a full chapter, on how data is more than numbers. It is memory, emotion, and the quiet art of listening deeply to the world. The invitation came with gold-embossed lettering. Amelia was to present her model at the quarterly assembly of the Eastern Statistical Consortium, a gathering of some of the most respected minds in applied mathematics. Oliver, nervous but proud, helped her prepare. They rehearsed in quiet classrooms, rewriting explanations until every part of Amelia's model could be told in plain language. "It's not about sounding smart," he reminded her. "It's about making them feel the truth in what you saw." Amelia nodded. She knew she wasn't there to impress. She was there to share what she had learned from the sidewalk. When the day arrived, Amelia wore a simple navy sweater, her notebook in hand, hair tied back. She stood before a packed auditorium, gray suits, sharp pens, and eyes that had seen decades of theory. The room was cold, polished wood and glass everywhere, as if it had never known the smell of warm flowers or the scrape of a sidewalk. Professor Caldwell sat in the center row. Amelia began. She didn't use slides, just a whiteboard, her words, and the rhythm of memory. "I learned Bayesian thinking on a sidewalk," she said. "But I didn't know it was called that. I just watched people, noticed how things changed, and tried to guess what would come next." She spoke about the bags, the beans, the texture of canvas, the sound of a drop, the pause before a hand let go, how a person's breath might mean there were fewer beans or more. The way grief, she said, made everything fall slower. The room shifted. A few pens stopped moving. She walked through her method, behavioral priors, adjusted weighting, calibrated emotion. She gave examples, a man's trembling hand, a child's nervous laugh, how sadness made the beans fall differently. She wrote out her notes, not typed, not cleaned, just how she had lived them. Then Oliver joined her briefly, mapping her process into clean Bayesian terms. Graphs, tables, posterior curves, confidence intervals. A distribution curve emerged on the screen, almost identical to the ones in academic papers, except it had come from a girl who once sold flowers. A moment of silence followed. Then Caldwell stood. He didn't raise his voice, but his words cut clean. "This presentation," he began, "is compelling, but it is not science. It is performance, anecdote, romanticism." He turned to Oliver. "And you, Mr. West, have leveraged a child's charm for academic spectacle. What you call Bayesian is nothing more than embellished intuition." A low murmur spread across the room. Oliver held back, but his fists clenched slightly. He took a deep breath. Before he could respond, Amelia stepped forward. "If I'm wrong," she said softly, "let the numbers say so." She walked to the board, wrote her final plot from the model, a series of predictions made from live street tests. Over 50 trials, 92% accuracy, p-values calculated, variables isolated. She underlined one sentence. Patterns emerge not from theory, but from listening. The room quieted again. A woman in the front row leaned forward. "Ms. June, may I ask, how did you isolate variables like emotional bias?" "I didn't," Amelia said. "I just wrote them down. I don't think feelings can be removed. I think they're part of the data." A pause, then nods. The chair of the committee stood. "We will require formal verification, a secondary trial, but this presentation stands." The first applause came from the back. Then it rippled forward, hesitant but growing. Oliver let out a breath. Amelia remained still, but a small smile flickered. Afterward, in the reception hall, scholars gathered in tight clusters. Some debated fiercely. Others glanced at Amelia with a mix of surprise and curiosity. She stood quietly, a glass of water in hand. Then a tall woman in a burgundy scarf slipped beside her and passed a folded card. Inside it read, "Some truths begin where textbooks end. Forgive us for not seeing sooner." No name. Just a hand-drawn circle and the number 14. Amelia smiled. Not because it was victory, but because it was recognition. Later that evening, she and Oliver sat outside under an old tree on campus. The wind was cold, but the sky was open. "You did it," Oliver said. Amelia nodded. "I think I opened something. Not finished it." Oliver looked at her. "That's how every real paper begins." Inside his coat, Oliver found a small envelope. He had printed out a letter from a student who had watched the presentation. It read, "For the first time, I understood Bayesian inference, not because it was explained, but because it was lived." He handed it to her. Amelia read it and pressed it between the pages of her notebook. Somewhere deep in the hall, Professor Caldwell sat at his desk. He replayed the recording, watched Amelia write, "Listening is data." He paused the video, stared at her handwriting, and for the first time in many years he didn't mark it up. He just listened. The flower girl from the sidewalk had not won a debate. She had changed the way it was being asked. 2 weeks after the presentation, Amelia was back in New York, notebook in hand, back to the sound of subway brakes and soft calls for flowers on the corner of 14th Street. But something had changed. She no longer sold flowers. She listened, observed, mentored a few younger kids who once watched her play the bean game. She called them data scouts. Then one evening the phone rang. It was the hospital. Mrs. June had collapsed at work. A fainting spell, they said, but it was more. By the time Amelia reached the emergency room, her grandmother was unconscious. Machines blinked. A young doctor greeted her in the hallway, coat slightly wrinkled, eyes alert. "She's stable now," he said. "But the scans show a clot. We're racing the clock. Timing is everything for the anticoagulants. Too early. It could cause bleeding. Too late. Permanent damage." Amelia's eyes widened. "So, it's about choosing the right moment?" "Yes. We're calculating the risk window. Running predictive models now." She looked around the room. She saw the chart. She saw the times, the test results, the vitals. Then she pulled out her notebook. "I know I'm not a doctor," she said, "but I know how to track signals. How to weigh the past and what's happening now. The doctor blinked. You're Amelia June? He recognized the name from the Bayesian seminar. His professor had forwarded the paper. I read your case study. You used environmental and behavioral priors for real-time probability adjustments. Amelia stepped closer. Yes. And I think we can apply the same logic here. Her previous blood pressure patterns, how she responds to heat, how she recovers from minor stress, all that is prior information. We now have new signals, oxygen dips, pulse changes, response to IV fluids. Together they sketched it on the whiteboard. A probability curve over time. Amelia suggested optimal inflection points for administering medication. She layered in her grandmother's history, the exact time of collapse, the way she looked before fainting, the color of her fingertips, tiny signals others might miss. The doctor paused, then nodded. Let's cross-check this with our model. We'll add her behavior profile to the clinical algorithm. Minutes ticked by. Then the team moved. The treatment was administered not at the standard interval, but at the precise moment when both Amelia's adjustments and the medical model aligned. They waited. 30 minutes. An hour. Then Mrs. June stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. Amelia? She was alive. The doctor exhaled. That timing was everything. Later that night, he found Amelia outside the ICU, notebook still on her lap. He sat beside her. You know, he said, we use that Bayesian formula all the time. It's in the system, hidden behind interfaces. She nodded. He added, but I've never seen someone make it so human. Amelia didn't answer. She looked through the glass at her grandmother, breathing steady, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Then she whispered, That's what it's always been for me. Not just numbers. It's always been about listening, seeing, caring enough to notice the smallest change. The doctor smiled. Well, tonight, that saved a life. Before leaving, he handed her a folded note. It read, Sometimes the best doctors aren't the ones who know the most formulas. They're the ones who know what they're looking for. Thank you, Amelia. She placed it gently into her notebook, beside her mother's letter. And as night fell over the city, Amelia didn't feel small in the world anymore. She felt precise. Because in the race against time, she had listened. And it made all the difference. Spring returned to Cambridge with magnolia blossoms and soft rains. Letters arrived early that season, thick with seal and promise. Among them was one addressed to Amelia June, an official notice of full admission to Harvard with a scholarship for exceptional research in probabilistic modeling. The letter called her a pioneer in practical Bayesian application. But Amelia, holding the envelope, did not smile immediately. She turned it over twice, then placed it beside her grandmother's photo. She thought of the children on 14th Street, of the boys who now carried beanbags like she once did, of the girl who learned to notice coin sounds before they hit the pavement. She walked to Oliver's office. I want to delay, she said. He looked up. Delay Harvard? 1 year, she said. I need to go back. Teach them what I learned, while it's still fresh, while they still believe in it. Oliver didn't argue. He only said, Then let's make it official. Amelia submitted the deferral request, and within days it was approved, with personal notes from 3 faculty members expressing admiration for her priorities. Meanwhile, a letter arrived in thick, old paper. It was from Caldwell. It read, Amelia, in every classroom I've taught, I believed knowledge must be proven, modeled, stripped of feeling. You reminded me that data isn't clean, it's human. You didn't just revise a theory. You revised an old man's faith in what matters. Thank you. Caldwell. Amelia read it once, folded it into her notebook. Then, something remarkable happened. The Institute for Applied Learning, inspired by Amelia's journey, launched a new initiative, the Bays Street Fellows Program, designed for students from informal or unconventional educational backgrounds who demonstrated practical mastery through life experiences. The program offered mentorship, living stipends, and placements in top labs, all rooted in the idea that learning isn't always from a classroom. At the launch ceremony, the chair of the institute said, "This began with a flower girl who listened more deeply than most of us have been trained to." Amelia was not there. She was back on 14th Street, not selling flowers, but sitting in a folding chair under a tarp, guiding 3 kids through probability using marbles, sound, and stories. One asked her, "Miss Amelia, is Harvard like magic?" She smiled. "No. Magic is knowing how to hear things others ignore." The boy nodded like he understood. From the corner, Mrs. June watched quietly, knitting in her lap. And so the girl who once guessed beans on the sidewalk didn't chase the halls of knowledge. She made knowledge return to the sidewalk, not as theory, but as light, shared freely. And that was only the beginning. Autumn returned to New York with amber skies and cinnamon air. On the corner of 14th Street, where vendors once shouted and buses roared, something new had taken root. A circle of folding chairs, a whiteboard, and a small wooden sign. It read, "Bays Street Learning, Free Classes, Open Hearts." Amelia stood by the board, chalk in hand. Her voice was gentle, steady. "Today, we're not just learning math," she said. "We're learning how to pay attention." Children leaned forward, marbles in jars, notebooks on knees. An old man napped on the bench nearby, while a barista leaned out of a nearby cafe to listen. From the back, in a worn coat and scarf, sat Professor Caldwell. He didn't speak, just watched. The children passed beanbags and guessed the contents. One explained variants. Another talked about priors. A third corrected herself mid-sentence and smiled. Amelia stepped aside. "Maria, want to explain today's curve?" A girl no older than 9 walked up. She drew a smooth hill on the board. "This is the guess we make when we know a little but not everything. It gets better when we listen longer." Caldwell's hand trembled in his coat pocket. He remembered saying those same words years ago, in a lecture he once believed only scholars could understand. Now, they echoed from a child. When class ended, Amelia walked to the signpost. With a small chisel and care, she carved a sentence into the wooden board. "Nothing is truly random, if we learn how to listen to the world." Caldwell stayed in his seat. Mrs. June sat nearby, a scarf growing long in her lap. Her fingers moved steadily, her health much improved. One of the children ran past Caldwell and placed a daisy on the bench beside him. "For you, sir," he said. The old man's eyes glistened. He held the flower, but said nothing. Later, as the sun dipped behind the tenements, laughter echoed in the alley. One boy tried to guess the number of paper clips in a jar, and shouted too soon. "Try again," Amelia said, smiling, "but this time listen first." Behind her, Caldwell rose. He walked to the edge of the circle, and for the first time spoke. "Could I sit closer next time?" Amelia nodded. "There's always space." And so the sidewalk became a classroom, the cold concrete, a place of warmth. And the theory once trapped in towers was now etched in memory, laughter, and light. Knowledge had returned home, to where it was first born, through the soft voice of a flower girl, the rhythm of beans in a bag, and the wisdom of hearts that never stopped learning. And on 14th Street, just beneath a small hand-carved sign, a kind of fire glowed, not of heat, but of understanding, the kind that warms a soul and stays lit long after the lesson ends. 1 year after the first opening day of the Bays Street classroom, wildflowers still bloomed along the edges of 14th Street. The little girl once holding a flower basket in the cold night had become a symbol, not just of knowledge, but of perseverance and quiet human kindness. But Amelia June's story did not end with a blackboard or the admiring gaze of scholars. It continued, deeper and quieter, like a seed germinating under soft earth, waiting for a new spring. Amelia returned to Harvard the following fall. She passed through the old brick gate in simple shoes, still carrying her weathered notebook. Inside were Bay's formulas, messy sketches from street children, and handwritten letters from students in poor neighborhoods, from single mothers who once listened to her teach beneath rooftops. The lecture hall welcomed her with reverent silence. She was no longer the flower girl, but a voice inspiring a new generation. Caldwell, now retired, quietly audited her first lecture. She taught not just with equations. She told stories of a man hiding a bean pouch behind his back, of a woman switching bags mid-game, of children's eyes the first time they guessed probability right. The hall fell still. No pens tapping, no phones glowing. They listened as if she was taking them back to a street corner where learning once lived in voices and glances. From a small street-side class, Bay's Street Fellows grew into a movement. Harvard launched partnership hubs in underserved neighborhoods, from the Bronx to Oakland. Children like young Amelia were invited to summer campus programs, not to prove anything, but to live fully in their curiosity. Amelia did not serve as director. She became an advisor, visiting classrooms, inspecting supply kits, and handwriting notes to every student. Those children might not yet grasp full equations, but they remembered her words. Nothing is truly random, if you're willing to listen. She encouraged teachers to log students' emotions in feedback. Today she seemed sad, or he smiled when he heard the bean drop. Over time, those notes became data. That data refined teaching approaches, a deeply human form of Bayesian adjustment. One April afternoon, Amelia returned to her old neighborhood. In her hand was a bouquet of white flowers. Her grandmother had passed away that winter, peacefully in her sleep. On the small shrine in their former apartment sat her photo and a note card. Never be afraid to learn. Back on the street, she saw a man standing in front of the old classroom. It was Caldwell. Older, slower, but unmistakably him. Serious eyes and ever-present notebook. "Still remember how to carve letters?" he asked, pointing at the wooden sign. Amelia smiled. "Yes, but this time not with my hands, with my heart." He sat on a bench. No more lecture halls, no more titles. Just a quiet teacher, listening to the student now teaching. Amelia continued teaching, but now spent weekends traveling to farms, nursing homes, and orphanages. She no longer brought chalk or boards. She brought stories about a flower girl who once guessed the number of beans and about those who taught her to listen to life. One day at a seminar, a student asked, "Do you believe in destiny?" She thought for a moment and said, "I believe destiny is what we call it when we look back, and everything somehow led us here." Then she smiled and placed a single bean on the table. What could be smaller, and yet carry an entire theory? And the flowers kept blooming, not just on 14th Street, but in the hearts of those who had heard her story.